Well, folks, we have a great show, and you have to excuse my croaky voice. I woke up this morning. I don't know what went on, but it's a little deeper, and so I'm going to try to get through this. But I have Garry King on the show with me today. Garry is a music producer, a drummer, and an audio editor, and he resides today in Southwest France, and he's worked with a number of major artists and companies, including recording in the studio with guitar legend Jeff Beck and recording with Lynn Turner from Rainbow and Deep Purple fame. And he's worked with Warner Brothers in Nashville, Park8 Studio in the UK, and with many other artists and organizations within the music industry. So it's always fantastic when I have somebody on the show that's in the music business and can give us some personal insights as to what goes on and what doesn't go on. So, Garry, thank you very much for coming on the show.
No, great. It's great to meet you, Mike. And yeah, the feelings are mutual.
Yeah, so we were talking before we got started here, and I know we're going to get into some pretty good stories that I know that the audience is going to be very interested in hearing from you. Like I said, because you're within the industry and you have been for a long time. And I was wondering, to get started, though, if you can just tell us a little bit about your journey, where you started, and how you ended up today doing what you do.
Yeah. Well, before I start, I've got a terrible habit of rabbiting on a lot. So just beware. I just can't stop talking. So, just like everybody, that started off, my dad played the drum in the Air Force. He was into drums. I wanted a drum set. We ended up getting a drum set, and I went from there. I played in a couple of local little bands when I was a kid, and I never did the cover band thing. I never did the bar band thing. When I was at school, my secondary school, I had a school teacher who was a bass player in a folk band, and he said, there's a band looking for a drummer. And I was too young really to go and play in the bars, but I did. They sneaked me in, I played the gig, and then they sneaked me out. With this band, they were like a kind of, they were the offshoot of another band that was sort of like a 60s kind of mod type band. They were called the Teen Beats. And their singer, Huggy, who I'm still in contact with after all these years, he ended up being in a bunch of movies. He went into the movies. He was in like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels and all those gangster films. So the last few guys of that band formed another band. I went and played for them, and completely naive, had no idea what I was doing. And that lasted a short time. And then there was another band. So I was about 16, 17. There was another band that came up on the scene, and this is all in the south coast of England. And they asked, they kind of found me. I don't know how, and they asked me, "Do you want to come and play?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And it was like kind of like Tears for Fears, that type of thing. Very percussive, like bands like Japan, all those sort of, with Mick Karn, the bass player, all that kind of stuff. So I played with them for a while, and it was great. We played in London. We were in a couple of magazines. And the south coast of England at that time, especially Hastings, Eastbourne and Brighton, were huge. Loads of bands went through in that time. We're talking like early 80s to sort of 86. The circuit was big. So, of course, there were lots of musicians coming through. The Hastings Pier, everybody played on there. The Stones played on there. Pink Floyd played on there. Everybody played in these seaside towns, And then this... I was playing with this band. The band was called Teotique, and it just wasn't going anywhere. You could see that this was just, everybody had a day job. It was going to roll on and roll on and roll on. And there was another band that played at the same time, a little bit similar, but a bit more poppy. And they said, well, we're going to London, which was a big thing back then. It was like going to LA or New York, when you lived in Kansas or something. And so they said, do you want to come? And they pinched me, stole me, which didn't go down very well. So I joined this band, and we went to London, and the guitarist singer and his girlfriend, who are still together today, they had a deal with a company called Peer Southern Music. which is a big publishing company in Denmark Street, which is where all the classic guitars are. This is where everybody used to go to get classic guitars, you know. Hendrix, all those people would go there and talk guitars and everything. So I joined this band, and again, it didn't last that long. The bass player left, and then the keyboard player left, and various other, you know, and in the end it just was me as a drummer, and I wasn't doing anything. So I then went back to Hastings and decided to form a band of my own. And that's when I got into the sort of more heavy rock thing, because I was into like Duran Duran, like I said, Tears for Fears, the Europeans, all these different sort of more kind of poppy type of bands. So then the 87 Whitesnake album came out, and I was like, that's what I want to do. So as I told you earlier, I grew my hair long and got a perm and wore overly tight trousers and cowboy boots, you know. and that was it, you know. And then just things progressed on from there. But that particular band in London is the story that we'll go into to do with the Beatles. But after that, there were various other bands, things didn't work out and so on. And then I started working with a guy that I used to go to school with, who's a banjo player, electric banjo player. And I don't know if anyone out there knows Baylor Fleck and the Flecktones. He's played on countless records, especially in the US. You know, he's an American guy. Victor Wooten's the bass player for the Flecktones. And Paul, that I worked with, was very much like that. He's an amazing musician. And we started working on a little project, very Celtic, instrumental. And this was back in the day with the fax machine. So I decided one day to, well, let's see if we can fax some of the labels in Nashville and see if anyone, of course, we didn't think anyone's going to even talk to us. And I came home from work one day. I was doing the old painting and decorating. I came home from work and the phone was ringing. I picked up the phone, and this guy in a big, thick American accent, I won't do an American accent and ruin it, but he said, I'd like to speak to Garry. And I said, speak, and he goes, this is Bob Sapariti from Warner Brothers Records. And of course you just think to yourself, yeah, whatever, you know, really? And it was Bob. And he said, we like your idea, because I didn't send him any music. All I sent them was a paper with the idea on it, which was mixing bluegrass and Celtic rock and all this together. And I put some little, using the old clip art, some little Celtic knots in the corner, and it got his attention. And he said, this is about 92, I suppose, something like that, maybe a little bit later. And he said, if you can get yourself out here, I want to see you. So me and Paul and John, we had a John and a Paul. I wasn't the Ringo, right? And we bought some plane tickets and we flew out there, and we spent 3 weeks out in Nashville, and we also drove up to Canada, to Toronto. But because we'd got a meeting with Bob at Warner Brothers, when I called up from like the old Motel 6 that we were staying at, everybody wanted to see us. It's like, oh, you're seeing Bob? Yeah. So they call around, and Bob said people were calling up, and we went in and we saw a few of these people. We saw Bob, and he said, I really like what you guys are doing. We think we could kind of use this for film music. We got some films coming up, and we're just like, well, this is it. This is perfect, right? So he said, what I want you to do is go back to England, record 6 more tracks like this, so we have 12 tracks, and then we'll see what we can do with it. And that really was my first real, diving in deep in with a big company and label. And then things just went on from there, and then I was married at the time, and that came to an end, partially, well, mainly my fault for being an idiot at the time, I wasn't up to anything bad, but, people have to put up with musicians. That's hard work, right? So, and I contacted Bob, and he said to me, well, you don't need to be in England anymore. Why don't you apply for a visa and come to the States? I'll help you out. So I went through the process, 98 that was. I got my visa, I packed my stuff, and I moved to America. And I ended up in between Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Because I knew if I went to LA or anywhere like that, I'd just get eaten up. So I was I wasn't a bigger fish, but a slightly bigger fish in a smaller pond. And I'd already worked with Jeff just prior to that happening. So the Jeff thing was a real leverage, you know, the who you know, not what you know. And that helped me get my visa. And I ended up in New Mexico. And that's kind of was the end of my what happened with my American experience and the things that went along with that. Like you probably saw on my site, they're working with the schools and the program that we had and everything, you know. And really all I've ever really been is a teacher, to be honest with you, you know. I'm a good drummer. I'm not the greatest drummer in the world, but I'm a good drummer. And I learned how to produce and how to mix records. So I was able to do, you know, all those things together. And that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, it's interesting that you got that hook.
Yeah.
Just by presenting an idea through a fax machine. Yeah.
And you know, I've told some people these stories before because, you know, you'll understand this. I related everything. Everything is exactly the same. It's only the tools that are different. So if you have a lazy mentality or you're a lazy person, you're always late. It doesn't matter whether you're a musician, a roofer or a chef, you're always going to end up losing your job in the end. So that was kind of like I'm a drummer. I have to play in time. So therefore I need to be on time. But as you know, how many people are always late for rehearsal? A lot of them,
exactly.
Right? You know, and that was kind of like, you know, my kind of push. And then towards the end, you know, we'd done all these schools things and stuff like that. And I played with a couple of other people out there. And then one day I just decided, you know, I think I'm done here with this. I just felt it was time to do something else. So I went back to England for 6 months. My background is my past family are all French, and don't hold that against us, but we're all French. and I said to my mum, you know, what about it? And 20 years ago, we moved here. And I've done more since I've been here because my mindset changed and that's when I got involved with Joe. So with Joe Lynn Turner. So that's kind of like it in a shorter form as you can say it, really.
So how did you and Joe, Garry, how did you actually connect? How did that happen?
Well, it was the same thing. I was sort of sitting here. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have the studio, and I'd been used to doing these things. So I thought, well, I'm just going to sit on the balcony for the rest of my life, drink wine, and that's it, you know. And then one day I said to my mum, I said, I've got to do something, you know. This is ridiculous. So I decided to start going through older singers that didn't seem to be doing an awful lot at the time. And there was a few other guys that I'd sort of picked. So I found Joe, and I'd seen Joe years before with Malmsteen, right, when he did the Rising Force Malmsteen stuff. And I thought, I'll write to him. So I wrote to him, and it went to his assistant. And she wrote back, and she said, Joe would like to talk to you. And I'm like, oh, come on, really?
Wow. Because
I came up with this idea of taking some of the older Rainbow and Deep Purple songs and kind of modernizing them up a little bit, making them a bit bigger and you know, a bit more of the date we were then. Maybe to try and start drawing in a younger audience, you know, like detune the guitars a bit, whatever. It never ended up like that, but that was the idea. So anyway, I get an email. He said, yeah, we've checked you out. He said, give me a call. So I called him up on the phone, and he was shopping in his local grocery store. And I could hear him. He goes, hang on a minute. And the lady's talking to him. You know, I said, he walked outside and he goes, yeah, great to talk to you. He goes, you know, send me some ideas. What do you want to do? So it took 2 years from first contacting him for me to get together with him to play. And it all came about because I was friendly with at the time with a guy from Nashville called David Buck, who used to be in a band called Guardian. They were like a Christian rock band, a little bit like Mr. Big. But Dave worked for Sony Music. So I contacted him, told him what was going on. He was a bass player as well. And I said, would you be interested in doing these shows? And he said, I'd love to, but I can't. I just can't. I'm too busy. But I know a guy who would be interested. So he put me in touch with a guy called Andy. Andy had been in quite a big band back in the early 90s. And I got talking to Andy. He lived in Phoenix, and he was married or is married to a Brazilian girl. And Andy knew the music scene in Brazil, and he goes, I think we can get Joe a load of gigs in Brazil. So I said, okay, mate, over to you. And 2009, we went out there for 3 months, and we played all over Brazil. And little Joe turns up, and and it was great, and there we were. So we had to learn properly all those songs, the Blackmore lines and all that kind of stuff. We had a Brazilian guitarist who's a good friend of mine, a guy we bought from Albuquerque, another friend of mine, Andy on bass. And then we went back in 2010 and did it all again. And that was and I've been friends with him ever since,
So what year, Garry, did you first connect with Joe?
Well, we first started talking at the end of 2007, middle of 2007, and then we went out in August of 2009 and flew Joe out. And I think we had 2 rehearsals. That was it. We did 17 songs. It's bonkers, 17 songs. We didn't play them all, but we learnt them all. So we did all our pre-productions at home, got together, ran, and boom, and off we went doing these shows,
And you played them live, or did you use backing tracks?
No, it was all live.
All live, okay.
2009, we didn't even have a smartphone. I mean,
yeah,
you know
good point.
I mean? Yeah. So, I mean, Joe, he's still as good as he was then, and then we went and did it again in 2010. We played some other cities, but, so I got to go and play for somebody that I'd been and paid tickets to go and watch, and like I said, we've been friends ever since, and he's an eye opener. I think he's as honest as they can be.
In your email, you had mentioned that you had a conversation with him, and I guess he gave you some insight.
Yeah. That
kind of kicked things off for you going forward. Do you want to talk about that conversation at all?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when we've kind of, I guess, along the lines, we've always known that the music industry, entertainment industry is like a mafia. Everybody knows that, it's a lot of money. They need to recoup their money. They need to recoup it with interest and so on and so forth. But we know about all these things. And then when the old, as Chris and Don, big shout out to Chris and Don, by the way, because a lot of this comes from them, really. But when the nonsense kicked off in 2020, I sat in the garden with my mum again, and I said to her, this is what I think they're doing, right? And she was, about after a month after that all started, we pretty much had sussed it out by then, like Mark Develin did. So I wrote to Joe and I said to him, I hope you're doing good, mate. What do you think about all this BS? And he wrote back to me one paragraph that I've got, and I can send it to you. One paragraph, and he said exactly what I was thinking. Exactly, word for word. There's a couple of bits to do with the states and the Fed and all this kind of stuff. But he wrote back to me, and I was like, well, there it is. And do you know what, Mike? He was the only one. I contacted everybody I knew, and everybody just went and just folded, Recording studios, I contacted people I've known for years, and he got right back to me, and over a few emails, he dropped a few more things in, you know, as the usual thing. Go and check this out and let me know what you think about this. And I was like, ooh, that doesn't look good, does it? You know. I actually emailed him yesterday, and then because Joe's all, and he doesn't mind anyone saying it now because he always wore a wig, right? Okay, and he's I mean, Joe's 72 now, something like that. He was 58 when I met him, you know, and it's like a lot of people looked at that and they went, "What is he doing?" It's like he's gone full circle. You know, he's not hiding behind anything anymore, and he's got a beautiful head as well. So it's not like he's got he's got one of them Bruce Willis job heads or whatever, right? And you know what I mean? He's got no disrespect to Bruce, but he's, you know, and he looks great. And then of course he released the Belly of the Beast album, which is all about the nonsense. So he was very brave to do that and step up and say his piece. You know, I mean, things happen to people. We know that all the time. That's, you know, but when he did that, and he sent me the first track, and he goes, "What do you think of the lyrics?" And I'm like, "There it is, mate. Just summed it all up." You know, anybody that, like I said, go and watch the video. It's only like a lyricy video, but and look at the lyrics, and that was it. That's what it did. It just did it for me, you know. So, and that is my connection with somebody a bit more further up the ladder, you know, who wasn't afraid to be honest.
Yeah. So his initial conversation with you was about the whole COVID C-19 bit that was taking place at the time.
Yeah. The old 91 divot. Yeah. And then it went on from there, because he actually said to me in one of his messages, he said, "If I told you what I could have got involved in, you probably would be kind of pissed." So, you know, you know, like I said, you know, that one person said to me, "Well, I'm not on my own with this." And you know, the other funny thing as well is I also have another friend who lives in Australia, who's a great singer. Sounds like Paul Rodgers from Bad Company. That's his kind of thing. And when that all kicked off, he wrote to me and he said to me, "Go and check this organisation out, starting with W." You know what I mean, right? Okay. And I'd never heard of them before. I was like, "What is he talking about?" And I went and looked, and you saw all this stuff, and we know a lot of it's contrived to keep people in fear and all this kind of stuff. But I looked at all of this, and a few statements that were made, you know, by these so-called wealthy people that just want to turn our lives upside down. And I sat down and I mailed over 70 recording studios and said, "Guys, look, I don't know whether this is bogus or whatever, but I think we kind of got to get together. You know, we all got to support each other." Never heard back from one of them.
Well, that goes hand in hand with Eric Clapton's experience, right? So he took the AstraZeneca shot, and then he did an interview. Yeah. And he talked about how his hands had become numb, and they were numb, I guess, for a couple of months, several weeks. And he actually thought that he would never be able to play guitar again.
That's right.
So when he came out and he talked about it, he was blackballed.
Oh, yeah.
He said his phone stopped ringing. Yeah. People weren't calling him for studio work. Yeah. Nothing. No. So this is what happens. I think that a lot of people do at least have an awareness of what's going on, but they're afraid to step forward because if they do, they fear that they're going to lose their career.
That's right. But the sad thing about that as well is that, of course, we know that a huge proportion of these people in the public eye work for the people that pull this stuff in the first place. Like Mark, you know, has said, with the connections, you couldn't make it. I know it's an old cliche now, but you couldn't make it up. And it takes 5 minutes to look and go, "Hold on a second, how come you're related to this lot?" If they are, I mean, me and my brother Neil, my brother was in the police. He was a training officer in the police. He was in the army prior to that. I think it was like 12 years. And he was also in the fire department. So he is what I would say could be the most indoctrinated person because he was told to when to go to bed, he was told to when to take a shower, he did right. And he was telling me stuff, you know, and he's like, you have no idea what goes on behind the scenes with some of these, you know, and he's right on my side, you know, and of course I trust him, you know, but he was saying the same thing, you know, he goes, you know, about the connections in his field of work as well. So when you start taking a look at people and I'm not saying that it makes them necessarily evil, but their job is to project what the people that they work for want them to hear, right? So when you've got Elton and Michael Caine sitting there making an advert about what you should and shouldn't do, hold on a second, you played a piano. What would you know? You know what I mean? I mean, give me a break. It's because they're told to do that, because that's who they work for. They work for the people at the creepy table. And now I think, and you all agree, because like I said, we're about the same age, right? It started off with the heavy metal. You know, that was the thing. But now it's all of it. The popsters. I mean, the only thing I don't think they've infiltrated yet is reggae. You know, but everything else is all symbolism. And that's one of the things. I wrote a little list down so I don't lose track. But I'd never seen the symbolism until 2020. It was as if I was meant to suddenly see all this stuff. And it's like, what is this with all these people covering their eyes up? I'd never seen anything like that. And I made a video about it. And loads of people have done videos on it. And of course, it's now become so normal. They've normalized it and people just go, it doesn't matter. Well, it's like, first off, you look ridiculous, right? I mean, come on. And then you just type in the name of anybody and there they are doing it. There they are. And if they're not doing that, they're doing one of the other little things. And you go, right then, well, I don't do that. Why is that? Well, because I'm not with you lot.
Right.
You know, we're not part of the gang, you know. And there are people, I've had emails in the past where people say, you know, like, you're only saying all this because you're jealous. And I was like, I'm not jealous. I've done very well. I've made enough money to keep my head above water. I'm a big fan of speakers and I'm also a huge guitar fan. You can keep the drums, they just give you a headache. But I'm a huge guitar fan, but I love speakers and sound and frequencies and energy. And I started to find for a short while, because I was very, very angry. I mean, I was like Mark. I was ready to get to, well, let's go out and sort this out. You know, of course, it's never going to happen, right? But I suddenly found that these characters were infiltrating me because they were stopping me from doing what I love to do. So I said, well, no, you're not going to beat me or people like me. We'll continue what we're doing, but I made a promise and I've kept it. And it's, you know, like I said, we're pretty much in year 6, really, when you think about it. I said, I will never work with anybody that does that, who pulls that, who sings about that, who shows any of those, period. You're on your own. And I don't care who it is, how much money they've got. I will never, ever get involved with that. And fortunately, over the last few years, nobody's come to me with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love when people say things like, you're only calling this out because you're jealous.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so indicative of how conditioned and programmed people are.
Yeah.
Because they're into this whole worship and cult mentality. They put these artists, these entertainers, these celebrities all up on a pedestal. And if you come walking along and you kind of cut across the grain and you're just pointing a couple of things out, they don't want to hear it. No. So what they'll do is they'll come and shoot you. They'll shoot the messenger.
Oh, yeah. And you know, that's a funny thing as well, is that, you know, like we said, we started off, you know, if you remember, I think it was in the 80s, they had the Satanic Panic thing, right, where all the bands were being accused of, and I laughed like everybody else. I went, yeah, what a load of old rubbish and everything. No, they were right. They were 100% right, you know? And I know people from some bands who have said, Oh yeah. We were into all that. Now, and what I was going to say about my brother is we came up with this thing, the 10% rule. If you don't have to believe everything, and of course they can stage anything they want to do. So can I. You know, I could be a fraud. It's not easy. It's not difficult to do, right? But we said if you take a 10% rule that there could be something dodgy about that, then you're open-minded enough to accept. But if you people turn around and go, that's 100% ridiculous. How do you know that? You don't know that person. You've never been to that city. You don't know, do you? Right? So, you know, I said to various people, because you try and break them in bit by bit, don't you? And it is hard, because I've found that people like to dangle the carrot, as you know, and then when you answer them, and you tell them, they go, what do you think about this? And you tell them, and then they go, bleh, their head explodes, and they tell you you're an idiot. And it's like, well, you just asked me what I thought, and I'm telling you, this is what I think, you know. But you know, some of the major acts, you know, what we call the major acts. I mean, I know guys who play for these people, right? I know people who play for Cher. I know people who play for Pink, right? And there's another guy I did a podcast with who goes by the name of Mr. E. He's got his channel back up now. And he's an American who lives in, where does he live? In the Philippines? No, not the Philippines. Bangkok he lives. He used to be a teacher there at the university. And in Thailand, right? And he's also a budding muso. He's played guitars for years. He was into hair bands and all this kind of stuff, you know. And I did a podcast with him, and it was nothing to do with his subject matter. It was to do mainly with bands. And I put it up a few years ago now. I put it up on YouTube. They took it down within 12 seconds. It was gone, right? And I was like, but that's a bit weird, just because I used the Mr. E logo, right? And then Mark Develin, he did a video called Papering Over the Cracks, I think it was called. And I reposted it. Boom, they took that down and flagged me as well. And I was like, well, look, we're not actually saying anything offensive here or anything. We're just pointing out some things that are going on. And they seem to have become a little bit more relaxed on that type of thing at the moment, because I think they want people to see some of this stuff. But, you know, the entertainment business is the perfect catalyst to lever people into either divide and conquer, splitting them up, or into doing things that perhaps they shouldn't do. You know, I mean, sport does it a little bit, but music definitely, and certainly the actors, you know, you know, oh dear, look what she's done. They go and do the same thing. You know, really, that's kind of like my thoughts on it. And, you know, and again, you hear these stories. It's so funny. When I was in Nashville, that was the time that a so-called young girl singer turned up, last name Swift, right? And when you read, I'm not saying it's not a great show, right? But, I mean, it's huge. It's massive, right? There's a lot of people work on that show. There's a lot of money involved. But all the keyboard warriors out there who think that this person's a billionaire, you don't know their bank account details. You know how much money they've got. They're not going to tell you, you know. Why would they? It's all amused to keep people sort of talking. But I was there, and there was this talk of this, you know, this young singer that had turned up. And there was a story that went behind it, like it does with everybody else. Well, now that time's passed, it's now the information is there that that person's father is a very, very wealthy man who runs a very, very big finance company and works for all these different entities that we talk about. Do you think just maybe that had something to do with it? Just maybe, you know? Or do you think that person was placed there to do that, you know? And the story, I was reading a bit the other day, the story of the mother drives the 12-year-old girl to Nashville, and the girl's getting out, nipping into record labels with her tape. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that, you know? They're not going to let you do that. It's impossible.
I did a whole show on Taylor Swift, and all you need to do is to look at her resume on Wikipedia,
Yeah,
and if you just critically think,
yeah,
you'll take a look at it and say, "There's no way that all of that happened without a gigantic machine behind her."
that's right.
And all of these stories, I mean, many of these stories are very, very similar. I looked at the band, the Warning.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, come on. That's a very new, modern example of their owned, their assets. That's what it
Yes,
is.
they're manufactured, and it's the same thing. When I went and took a look at the Warning, this is a band, folks, and maybe Garry can expand on it some more. But out of Mexico, three young ladies, their rise, their trajectory to where they're at today, and what they've achieved so far, it's the same thing. It's very similar to Taylor Swift. I mean, they haven't hit Taylor Swift levels, but the way it rolls along, the way it progresses, once you understand how it works, it's easy to see.
Yeah.
And that's what I noticed when you mentioned them. I hadn't even heard of them. So I said, let me go take a look at it. And I looked at their background. I thought to myself, there you go.
I've said this to a few people. I've said, name me one band from Mexico that's been successful. Nobody can do it. There's one band called Mana, right? Mana. They sing in Spanish. Alex Gonzalez, great drummer. You can't find. All of a sudden, these three girls appear out of nowhere from Monterrey. They don't even come from Mexico City or the usual haunts, right? And they're the drummer, who can play, I'm not saying can't play, can sing, is in a magazine, a drum magazine, at 12 years old. Okay,
Right.
we'll give you that one. They then do a crowdfund and the next thing you know, they're on the Ellen DeGenerate show. Not possible under any circumstances, which way, shape or form. I know plenty of people who play in bands, young girls, pretty girls, young guys who will never be on a TV show, right? And then they get given 10 grand and they go off to Berkeley. Woo! Just like that. And they do a TED Talk where at 15 odd years old, they're talking about, we've written songs about our experiences, and you're like, 15, you haven't got any experiences. What are you doing? You know? And again, I'm not saying they're not good, because they are good, right? But every single picture, they're flipping the old signs, they're flipping the horns, they're doing this, right? They've got their tongues sticking out. Look at their album cover. Their album cover is a complete mockery, again, of The Last Supper. They've got fat businessmen around them with loads of money, and they're doing all that kind of stuff. And then they start them off as this other guy now calls them cookie cutter girl next door band. And now, of course, they're sexualizing them. Right. So now they're dressed up in nuns' outfits and wedding dresses and stuff like that. And then the drummer gets the old monarch butterfly tattooed on the back of the neck. And if anybody knows about that programming stuff, they're all assets, because there is no way that is possible. And like you said, it follows a pattern. John Bon Jovi's the same thing. Sorry for Jovi fans. John Bon Jovi wasn't touting around tapes. John Bon Jovi's parents were both in the Marines. There's always a military connection somewhere along the line. And it just happens that his cousin Tony owned the power station that he had built in New York. So he wasn't just a guy. He had connections in the industry. And then, of course, the story is that they just asked him when he was sweeping the floor, would you like to come and sing on this song? And his career went from there. Now, you might get one where something like that happens, but they're all connected. Like Mark said, it's either Ministry of Defence, it's some political whatever, or the parents have masses of money. You know, I mean, obviously, it's Scott Swift. Do you really think Scott Swift said to his wife, go on, drive around Nashville, drop her off, see what she can? No, he'd pay somebody to go and do that, or he'd know somebody. It doesn't work like that, you know?
Or she was groomed from an early age.
Yeah, well, they're all, I think, Mike, they're all groomed from an early age, you know?
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, like I said, I've worked with so many amazing musicians, singers, songwriters, and they've never got anywhere because they don't have the financial support to be able to go and pay to go out and do these things. You know, most people don't realise that to get onto a festival, you got to buy on. You have to pay to go. They don't pay you, you know, and especially when you start off. But I've sort of kind of like looked at it like, you know, again, the pyramid thing where you've got these at the top, you've got the middle management, and they've gradually gone through them all bit by bit. And it's like, well, we can use those to affect these group of people. We can use, you know, you see some of these things, again, going back to the old Swift, you know, where it's like, well, she must be doing something right. She's a billionaire. And it's like, you don't know that. They're not billionaires because, you know, to generate that much money in today's market when nobody's buying any music, these big concerts costs, you know, $1 million to put on. I mean, I think even Metallica back in the 90s, it was 350 odd grand to do one of these big shows. How do they make all that money? And why would they tell you about it? They wouldn't. They would say, well, it's my business, you know. But that's how I think it's worked since the 50s. I would say since Elvis, that's when it kicked in, you know, and it's gone on like that. And, you know, one of the things that we're going to say about is when you look at the symbolism stuff, I mentioned to you in my email about the bird cage thing. Why are these people going to events with bird cages on their heads? So you got Audrey Hepburn with a bird cage on her head right back then. You got the Beatles with their heads in bird cages. You've got, I mean, they're just right across the board. Is that showing they have to show that they're trapped? Britney Spears, same thing. Or they're either that or they're all into birds. I don't know. Bird cages. What, you know? And then you see at these galas, they just had that last Met Gala where all the men were wearing women's high-heeled shoes. Why would you be doing that? That's the ritual thing, I think, where they're told what they have to do. And you know, there was the last one, the guy's walking around with a trash bag with trash written on it, and he's got a piano strapped to his back, a cardboard piano. If somebody told us to do that, we'd say, I'm not doing that, it looks ridiculous. But they turn up like that, you know? And I think it's part of that shaming thing, that ritual thing. You know, what do I know? I might be wrong, but there's so much evidence out there that, like you've said, that shows how these things are placed, pieced together, and you know, that's kind of how I see it, you know?
Yeah, well, going back to Taylor Swift and even The Warning, people or any other band, what people don't realize is these are stories.
Yeah.
So they're going to give you a good story. It doesn't mean that it's true. And your point is very valid, Garry, when they say, well, you're a billionaire or whatever. Well, most people are not going to talk about their financial situation. It's none of your business.
No, exactly.
So when they talk about this stuff, that is the compiling of the official narrative or the story around this person. And it creates a fan base. It creates worship. It creates a cult. In the case of Taylor Swift, their cult has a name. They're called the Swifties.
That's right. Look at the symbolism in that, the snakes, the apples. What do you think that's all about?
Yeah.
You know, Cher did the same thing. It's, you know, for people listening to this, go and research some of these things and ask yourself, why are they showing these things? What they all do it, right? Because they're showing you, again, that's the whole androgyne thing, the Adam and Eve, the apple, the snake, all this kind of stuff. It was the metalers that used to do that originally, not the pop stars. Now the pop stars are all doing it. What, because they are into Whitesnake and Metallica? No, because they've now advanced that much. It's like the Saturnalia, the Saturn thing, you know. They have these little Saturn tattoos that looks like a 10-year-old's drawn it on with a pen. And then all these young girls go out and do the same thing. What exactly are they promoting? What, because they're into astronomy? Of course not. It's all, like Mark said, it's occultism in either a very heavy form or a light form, but it's still the same thing.
Yeah, they're perpetuating the symbols and the sigils. Another person, Garry, I wanted to mention is Katy Perry. I knew a guy, Tommy. He was down in Nashville, and he used to teach her guitar. And he was her guitar teacher. And I mean, I haven't spoken to Tommy in a number of years, but back, I guess it was about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, 8 years ago, he explained that when she was pulled in to begin her career in music, he said initially he was still communicating with her and she would respond. And then after a period of time, he would write to her and there was no more responding coming from her. And what Tommy was telling me was he was getting a very suspect feeling about it. In other words, it was okay in the beginning. And then once it got to the point where she was on that springboard, there was no more communicating with people from the past.
No.
So you got to shut that down, especially people that knew you before the transition or the transformation took place.
Yeah.
And I won't mention, Tommy's last name, but he's a very good musician, and he relayed that story to me several years back.
Yeah, and these, this is another thing that people they sort of, when they question your idea, they go. I say to them, I said, you don't think this person started this at like 18, 19, do you? This started the day they popped out the womb. This is what they were going to do, and when you like with what Mark Develin says, when you look at the connections, you go, yeah, I can see that now. But this rags to riches is just it's always been nonsense. And like I said, when you look back and you look at the connections, there was a thing that I said a long time ago. I was always scratching my head. It's like, why do these people bother to get married? You know what I mean? Because it never works out, does it? They always end up 90% of them. And when you look at who they get married to, they don't get married to the makeup girl or the person at the venue that they met who's serving beers or whatever. It's all interlinked because it has to be, right? And it's very difficult to find one person that is married to somebody. That you find the odd one or two, but that is just somebody that they met. I mean, the story with John Jovi and his wife, they met at high school and all this kind of stuff. Maybe they did, but most of them, especially the newer group, it's literally like round and round the houses they go. And Mark, Mr. E, he said to me, he goes, I think what it is that, like with a lot of the musicians that play for these, they pick the people that know to keep their mouths shut, because they must know that there's something not quite right with this situation. And they just, I've done all the NAMM shows, all that stuff. Hey, go to the NAMM show, meet some people, get a good gig, We know all these people. I'm with Sabian, with Mark Schulman and all those guys and everything. And then you start looking a little bit in deeper, and every now and again they roll them out again, but it's always the same guys and girls that play for these artists. And then when that comes to an end, they've already nurtured their next load of people, to bring them in to carry on with the next artist. And when you've got, you had Madonna, that ended up turning into Lady What's It. I hate saying their name. Then you've, and they gradually, so as one gets older, they bring the new one in that basically does a very similar type of thing. And then, and who's coming in next? They've got a couple already lined up that are doing the same thing. The next generation comes in. It's like the Take That and the boy band stuff and all that. The Osmonds, it's that sort of normal. But it's when it's come to this point where it's now where they are selling a certain type of idealism, which I think is really unhealthy. And you only have to watch a little bit, if you can stomach it, of the Grammys to go, yeah, that's enough of that. It's. I was asked a little while ago, Mike. Somebody asked me a couple of years ago. They said, out of all the people that you could play for, who would take you on, who would you play for? I said, none of them. I don't care how much money, none of them. I would not do that. Not now, not what I know. And like I said, I might be wrong about a few people, but I don't know. It's a little bit different to the 80s. It's advanced quite a lot, you know?
Well, there's always going to be an exception to the rule, but there is a rule.
Yeah.
And when they marry, when they have these relationships and all that stuff, what people don't realize is it's a control system. So in order to have a control system, you have to control it. And so you have to have the right people in the right places that are going to ensure that the control process stays in place. And it's very difficult for people to really get their arms wrapped around it because they believe the stories that we talked about earlier, Garry, where they think that the rise and the fame that these people have achieved is organic. Not to dwell on the Beatles here, but it's the issue I have when I talk about the Beatles. To think, and I used to be a huge Beatle freak, so I used to believe this, all right? I was drinking the Kool-Aid. But knowing what I know now, the research that I did, to think that a band did what they did organically without a machine behind them, you know, now I sit back and I think it's absolutely ridiculous to think that that happened.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just with the music industry, like you mentioned earlier, I think before we got started, you said this in the entertainment arena, we have music, we have Hollywood, and we have sports.
Yeah.
These are three areas where they really have people, they got their hooks in them because people are worshiping bands, artists, singers, celebrities, ball players. Once you get into that whole worship bit, and like I said, you're in a cult, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for people to break out. Like music is very tough because for many, many, many people, the music that they're into is the soundtrack to their life. They can actually take their life and they can link it back or relate it back to moments in their life, happiness, sadness, or whatnot. So there's an emotional attachment that they have, and it's very difficult to break the code on it, to break the spell.
Yeah. Well, of course, I mean, you know, there's a book that tells you that idolatry is not a good thing. And I've never done that. I've never, you know, I've met enough people. It's like, you know, my Jeff Beck story. You know, it took me a year to get out to Jeff's house. And he lived just up the road from me, like 20 minutes in the car. And being a big guitar fan, but I've got pictures of his house and my gear there, but I never took a picture with him because I didn't want to be one of those. Hey, could we take a picture? You know, could we take a picture, Jeff? And the story with that is I had a friend who ran a studio that was above a hair salon, right? So really small. And we all used to go and record there. This is in Hastings on the road to Battle. And he called me up one day and he said, "You've got to come up to the studio. You're never going to guess who's coming into the studio." And I was like, I couldn't think of anyone. He goes, "I'm not going to tell you." He said, "But a guitar great." And all I could think of was Pete Townshend. I don't know why, but it's who came to mind was Pete Townshend. And I went up there and standing in the corner was that light green Strat. And I knew instantly it was because I'd just seen Jeff in the studio with Bon Jovi doing Blaze of Glory on a video. And I went, "Jeff Beck." And he goes, "Yeah, Jeff Beck's in my studio. Jeff Beck's Big Town Playboys." Right? So Jeff comes in with a big mop of hair and all this sort of stuff. Hello. And I thought, I'm not going to hang around because I don't want to be uncool. You know, nice to meet you and everything. I left. And then for a year, I pestered my friend Clive. You've got to get a package to Jeff. Because Clive was working at Jeff's house, helping him build his studio in the roof of this manor house that he's got. And he goes, "No, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that." I said, come on. You know, this is it for me, you know? And then about a year later, I got a phone call and he said, "Right, get your gear in the van, go out there. He wants you to come." So we went out there. I took down, I don't know if you remember Cozy Powell, the drummer Cozy Powell.
Yep.
His drum set was there because he'd long gone, you know. And I took his drum set down. I put my drum set up. And Clive said to me, he goes, "He'll either like you or he won't. If he doesn't like you, he won't be coming back tomorrow." And I was like, okay. And Jeff came up with a tray of, got a fly in it, a tray of tea and biscuits. And we had tea and biscuits. And I was there for a week. greatest experience of my life. He showed me all his guitars. He showed me stuff that people had given him. We had people like Steve Lukather was calling up, you know, because he was friends with Lukather from Toto. He was talking about Pino Palladino, all these different people. And he started asking me, he goes, are you playing in a band at the moment? I said, well, kind of, you know. He said, we're going out to the States. We're going to play Hollywood Bowl and everything. And of course, being naive, I thought, he's going to ask me to do it, right? I could have done it. But no, because I didn't put bums on seats. And two, his manager probably said back then, well, we don't know who this guy is. You need somebody who's part of the gang. And I'm not saying Jeff was one of them. But, you know, it was an amazing experience. And years later, I went back to see him. I've been doing some stuff with the drummer from the Scorpions, with Herman Rarebell from the Scorpions. And Herman asked me to take a package over to Jeff. So I took it over there and Jeff was there and I got talking to him and that was it. And then, of course, the weird thing happens with Jeff where he departs and he just happens to have had Johnny Depp there at the same time, which is a bit suspect in my opinion. But there you go. It's just another story. But, you know, these things all follow a pattern. It was the most amazing thing to have done and to be able to... And it was just me and him. Nobody else. And he was played and it was like there was a whole band there. It was incredible, you know. So, you know, that was a life experience again. And he was telling me, I was talking to Mum about this. He said, we're going to have a big party in a few weeks. Kate Bush is coming, Rod's coming, all these people are coming. What would have happened if I'd been invited to that? Would I then have been, you know, I was like 32, something like that. Then would I have been accepted into this field of maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, Mike Stock talked about that. Mike's a friend, and when I did an interview with Mike going back a number of years ago, he said that he was invited to one of these parties, and they explained to him that, you know, it was everything was going to flow: the booze, the drugs, the women, the boys, everything. And Mike, the story he relayed to me was, he said, the stuff you're telling me, I'm going to paraphrase here, it's not legal. Some of the stuff is not legal, right? So they said to him, oh, don't worry about it. The police chief's he's invited as well. Now, Mike never took them up on it. No. And he steered clear. And, you know, Mike is rock solid. He in fact, you and Mike would get along really well. It's because of you're talking the truth. You're cutting through all the nonsense and you're getting your message out there, and you're both in the music industry. But he said, you know, they try to lure you in initially. It appears very innocent. Hey, do you want to attend a party that we're having? Yeah. And of course, you're right. So it's tiered. There's steps on the ladder or the stairwell where you take the first step, you got your foot in, and then if you like it or you enjoy it, you take another step, and before you know it, you're at a point where you're in so deep, it's almost impossible to get out for some of these people. Oh, yeah. And when you're young, of course, you know, you see all this stuff, and of course, you're not thinking straight and everything. You think this is the greatest thing ever. And that's how it escalates. And if you're, you know, I mean, I was again, I've been explaining some things to people over the years. A girl I worked with in Australia that I sent you the album, she did a song in there called Celebrity Smile. And her whole album is about light and dark. And she's got a great cover. I love her to death. She's brilliant. You know, we've done 3 albums together over 10 years. And she's sort of self-taught. She writes all the songs. They're my guys playing on it. Lucio, bass player. Shout out to him and Fab and Gus and that. And, you know, we've got no finances or backing for any of that. And she does it all. She's amazing. She should be out there doing it. But she, again, usual story. But, you know, we were saying that once you get involved, I would say it's almost 99% impossible to get out. Once you get in there, you know, in the old days, you know, back when we were looking for deals and stuff like that, of course, which was never going to happen.
They used to do what was called shell view. So like you'd work for RCA, I'd work for Sony. We'd find this band, we'd argue it out. You'd take them on, you'd then record them, shelve them, and they wouldn't be able to do anything. They're stuck, right? Because they don't want that band competing with another band. Oh, they wouldn't do that. Of course they do that. And then sometimes those bands did get released or they would completely fold. They put them on a retainer, stuff like that. When you tell people about these things, they think you're barking mad. Like, why would they do that? Because it's about the money and about the power and about the control. And, you know, you see these events happen, like there's the scandalous certain rapper guy thing going on at the moment. And I see people talking about it online, you know, like, oh, these people are going to go to jail. Oh, they got up to it. No one's going to jail. It's all there to distract you. It's not real. It's all made up. The same thing as a lot of these things we've seen over the last few years. Oh, this person was there. None of those, because they all work for the same people. They're playing a part in this big play. They act on stage. They act off the stage. You know, they've grown up learning how to do that. And I don't think that you could get out of that. You know, I think that you'd probably end up in a ditch somewhere or, you know, whatever else. But that it is a heavy industry, as you know.
Going back to the occult for a moment, Garry, and I don't know if you could talk about this. So if you can't, or if you don't know anything about it, just say, Mike, I don't know anything about it. But going back to Joe Lynn Turner for a second, it's always been rumored that Ritchie Blackmore was heavily into the occult. I mean, I always kind of equated Ritchie to Jimmy Page as far as their connections into Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
And occultism. Did Joe ever talk about that with you, or?
No. The only thing he ever said, he said a couple of things, and we all laughed again because we were like, "Oh, come on, Joe, you've been drinking. Don't be silly," you know. But he said, and I might have missed a few pictures. I went through every single picture I could find, and I never found Joe once doing the Metallica horns or any of that. None of it, right? All the people around him were, but not Joe. And the two things he told me about, he said, we were at a dinner table and he said, he was talking about stuff, and we got onto the subject of what we really are, where we really came from and all this. And he said a few things to be like, yeah, come on, Joe, give me a break. Well, now it's starting to ring a little bit more true. And I was like, perhaps he was right about all that. But he did say, he said, you know, the old devil's horn thing, right? And yeah. And he goes, well, you know, that was a big thing that Dio did, that Ronnie James Dio did. And he said, because he was good friends with him as well, you know. And he said, Ronnie told me, he goes, my gran said to me, if I keep doing that, the devil will come and take me away, right? Because, i.e. that you're showing your allegiance to whoever, and when the time comes for them all to be taken down, you're going with them. That kind of thing. So that was kind of really what he was sort of harking on about, but he really didn't talk. He told some funny stories, but he never covered any of that. Although he has covered it now in these songs that he's done in this album. And again, I don't know the real background of Joe. I don't know. I know his wife. He's got a little boy now, you know, and but you can. When you go and look at some of the others, you look at them and you go, yeah, it's as clear as a nose on your face, you know. But Joe, I don't know. There's just something about him. I think he's a great guy. He's very, very funny. And he said to me, why do you think I never got up there like those ones? There's a reason for that. I'm just a singer. And of course, he wasn't a singer. He was a guitar player originally. That's what he was. So he kind of, he didn't give any indication about, because it wasn't really something we talked about back in 2009, you know, because if he told us about that, we'd have gone, yeah, Joe's out of his mind. Well, now it's kind of like, no. I think if he'd, you know, we'd have said something about it, you know. But when you see, you know, there's a few people that talk about the repetition of things. When you see repetition after repetition after repetition, you know, all these guys have all got their hand tucked in here, you know, like Keith Urban and all that. It's like, what do you got? What are you into Napoleon or something? What you got your hand tucked in here for? Why are you doing this? Even Mike, even down to, I was looking through some old bands. There's the Clash. Standing, this classic picture with Mick Jones standing against the wall with his hand tucked in his jacket. Why are you doing that? I'd never seen any of that before. We got a cold hand. They all do it because, and I don't know if you saw the latest one, and I did a video on it. I called it The Sorority of the Sticky Out Tongue. Why are all these women sticking their tongues out? I mean, you look ridiculous, right? And we're talking some real high-end actresses and that doing all this. Now we know why. It's not because it looks cool. It looks ridiculous. You look silly, you know, but they're all doing it. And then you see the adverts for things like chips and crisps and stuff like that. And they've got kids doing it. Got kids covering up their eye with a crisp with its tongue sticking out. Because they're helping to, they don't realise it, but they're helping to push that image along. And they don't realise that because they're little kids, you know. There's our local shop here. There's a picture of this pretty young girl with a woolly hat on, and she's got a crisp over her eye and she's sticking her tongue out. And then me and my brother walk down to the local DIY shop, and there's a picture of a girl standing there with a bucket of paint, and she's got a paint roller over one eye, and she's sticking her tongue out. And there's another one. Symbolism's everywhere. It rules the world, doesn't it? You know?
Yeah, signs and symbols rule the world.
Yeah.
I've explained this for a long time, and you know, what they've done is to, like you mentioned earlier, is to normalize it. Is to put it into the mainstream. Now, people don't even blink anymore when they see this stuff.
No.
You know, and it's just absolutely amazing. It really is. There was another question that I wanted to ask you, Garry. You had mentioned in your email about a McCartney connection.
Oh yeah, well that's the biggie. That's the big.
Oh, okay.
That's the big.
If you don't want to go there yet, just let me know.
Oh no, well as long as you've got time, I could talk to you for hours. So you know what it's like once we get going.
Yeah.
But
this is great.
Yeah, the thing about this is, and again, you know, we used to live about 25 minutes from Paul, and my mum was driving past. It's in a place called Peasmarsh. My brother was in the car. We were kids. My brother was in the car, and there he was cutting his hedge, right, trimming his hedge. Now, was that? I don't know. There was a guy looked like Paul trimming his hedge. So, Mum pulled up and said, "Go and get a piece of paper." And went and got his autograph. He goes, "Yeah, no problem." Gave us this with a smiley face, you know. Gave his autograph. So years later, a long time later, I joined this band that went to London, as I told you, with Pure Southern Music. And this was when I very first moved out of home. And there was a guy in the band, guitar player in the band, super good looking guy. Excuse me. Me and him got on like a house on fire. And we used to do all the usual things that 20 and 21-year-old blokes that played in bands did. We never did drugs, never did any of that, right? Okay. But we used to go out, we'd go to this club called The Crypt where all the bands played, and then we go up to this other place, and there was another friend of mine, and we go up there and we just, you know, there's a load of girls that we knew, usual sort of story. Nothing to be proud of anymore, but that's the way it was, right? The 86, 85, 86. Anyway, this guy, he said, "Well, look, I've got an apartment, a flat. Why don't you come and live with me? It'd be great." And I said, "All right then." So I moved in with him. You know, and I think I lived with him for about a year and a half. And we used to go out, and we went up to London, we did all these things. And I met his parents and never thought anything of his mum was really nice. You know, I don't know whether she's around anymore, but his dad's not around anymore. But he was very well spoken, real nice guy. Like I said, super good looking bloke, made the rest of us look like trolls. And he played guitar. He was a pretty good guitar player. And I went out and met his dad. So there was Breed, Broad Oak, Rye and Peasmarsh. So this is this area in East Sussex. So his dad lived in Breed, Broad Oak. His mum lived in Rye because they'd got divorced. And Paul lived in Peasmarsh and still does, I think. I think he still lives at that house. And anyway, I met his dad, and his dad is a very famous English jeweller, right? So like Mark says, your dad's not a plumber. He's a very famous English jeweller. And if Alistair hears this, his name's Alistair, I'm not trying to be nasty. I'm just, it's just one of those connection things that we talk about. So anyway, his dad was a jeweller. He was the last, they say he was the last of Britain's great goldsmiths, And I met his dad. Nice enough guy. I met him, but I think twice. And then all these years later, it's like Alistair disappeared, right? He completely disappeared off the scene. But prior to doing that, he married Mary McCartney, right? Now, what is the chances that an unemployed, on-the-dole musician playing in a relatively average band is going to marry into music royalty of the highest genre? I think the answer to that you already know, right? So anyway, I didn't think anything of it. You don't think anything of it, right? You think, whatever, right? And anyway, story is, for some reason, it didn't work out. And I had this little band, and Alistair actually came out to this rehearsal place in this village hall with another friend of ours. I hadn't seen him in years. I was like, it was brilliant to see him, And we didn't really talk about any of that, what had been going on. And that was it. And I never saw him again. I moved to America, did all that, I end up here. And I really liked the bloke, And I thought to myself, that's ridiculous, we should have stayed in touch. So I wrote a letter. I typed it, wrote a letter, and I knew his mum's address, and I sent it to his mum with my email in it. And she emailed me, and this was years ago now, 15 years ago. And she said, oh, it's great to hear from you. I'll get Alistair to get in touch with you. And I was like, brilliant. Reconnected, Of course, I never heard anything. And then, he just disappeared. Gone. You couldn't find him anywhere. It didn't matter how you typed his name. All you could find was a couple of small pictures from the wedding and a few pictures with him at a couple of parties, right? And I thought, well, that's weird, isn't it? He's apparently got 2 sons. You never see any pictures of him with his kids or anything like that. So I kept looking, and you know what it's like? It's like the energy starts to come in, and it's you want it, so it comes to you type of thing. Yeah. So I started finding pictures of him. I was like, there he is. He looks great. It doesn't change at all. And he was working for this company that he was kind of running. It was nothing to do with music, nothing to do with anything like that. Completely the opposite. So I emailed him, and he emailed me back. And a big paragraph as well. Like, we were just talking about the old days and all this and so on. So he said, do you ever come to London? I went, no, not anymore. So he said, well, I go to Portugal a lot. Well, our airport's only 40 minutes up the road. Why don't you fly over? Mum would love to see you. And I sent him my website, which of course has got all my 2020 vision videos about what's going on around the world on it. And I think he took a look at that, and I never heard from him again. He was like, ooh, Garry knows a bit too much of what, I don't know. But I never heard from him again after that. Which was weird because he wrote me this really nice message. So, I don't know. But then, I this guy we used to go out with a lot, his name's Andy, I messaged him, and I said to him, in all the years that we went out drinking and girls, did you ever see Alistair with a girl, with a girlfriend? No, never. I said, doesn't it seem odd to you? So he said, I don't remember ever seeing Alistair with a girl. Now, I lived in a flat with him. He never ever brought a girl home or had a girl stay over or anything like that. And he wasn't gay. He wasn't gay. Why didn't he ever go out with any girls? I mean, we all did. Like I said, they should have been lining up for this guy because he was cool, he was smooth, he was super good looking, But not him, right? And then after all this started and we started doing this, you know, sort of research, he's got this, I mean, he sounds awful. I'm not criticizing these people, but you know, the socialite kids, this sort of thing. So he's got this older son, and who's now famous for being what? He doesn't have a job or anything. But he's famous. So he's in magazines and all this kind of stuff. And of course, it's so funny because the news people say, you know, the uncanny resemblance to Paul McCartney doesn't look anything like him, right? Well, he's got a nose, 2 eyes, and a mouth. He doesn't look anything like him, right? So anyway, I'm reading this thing, and now I sent this to Chris from Sheep Farm. I said, clock this, Chris. What do you think of this? And he went, ooh, looks like you had a narrow escape there. He said, they like to keep it in the family, don't they? And I said, yeah. And I sent it to Mark as well, Mark Devlin. So my friend's son is now dating a certain girl, her last name Gates, right? The so-called daughter of that guy, right? The chances of that are no. It doesn't. You know, like I said, if it's like, he's going out with Sting's daughter, you know, they sort of. But what are the chances of that? And now, of course, that is a thing. So once again, like Chris said, he goes, that's how they keep the ball rolling, sort of stuff, you know. And I've looked everywhere to find pictures of him with his eldest son. You can't find pictures of him anywhere, but you can find pictures of the rest of the family with that guy. And it just seems very strange to me. And I was wondering, you know, Al probably, if he caught me, probably beat me up, but maybe he was chosen to do that. You know, everybody knew each other there, you know, and the thing about saying about Alistair's dad was a jeweller commissioned to the Queen. And he also made a lot of stuff for the movies for James Bond. If I remember rightly, he made the Golden Gun for the man with the golden gun, James Bond. But he was also very on with Princess Margaret. And there's pictures of him at these bashes with the royals. So he wasn't just a guy with a dad who was a jeweller. He was connected, or they are connected. And I just wonder, maybe, you know, they put them together, and there's no way you just walk in there. You know, you couldn't, you know, I know an electrician that used to work out at Paul's, and another friend of mine, his dad used to look after the estate. Well, they were checked out by MI5 and people like that in case they were, you know. So that I've sort of tried to sort of get that story out a few times, but I don't want it to sound like I'm pointing a finger. I just think that, again, it just shows that there's 100% connection there, and now the next generation connection is now the son is now dating of this person, and you go, right, okay, and that's how it works, as you know.
Yeah, you have to control the control system. Now, when you were rooming with Alistair, Garry, did you notice anything that was peculiar, or at that point in time, it was just,
no,
I mean, there was nothing to notice?
No, nothing at all. We're just a couple of guys, 2021. I remember one night, Alistair got so drunk, this guy we knew called Taff, he had to carry him out of this club, put him in the car. These two girls we knew drove the car home. Right, we put Alistair to bed and he didn't wake up for 2 days. We thought he'd died. We kept sitting, he's all right. Perhaps we should have called but when you're 20, you don't care, do you? And he got up all groggy, and that was the end of it. But there was nothing. But he used to go out to these, they used to have these parties there, apparently. So they have like VE Day party, everybody would dress up in these out, in those sort of 1945 sort of things. But then so Alistair got kicked out of the band, right? So we were this company, like I said, and we got called into the office one day, and there were 6 of us in the band, and they said, one of you's got to go. Who do you think it is? And we just all looked at each other and said, I don't know. And they said, Alistair has to go. Now, I'm wondering, again, if they said, no, you can't be doing this, get him out, because he's got another job to do. And then Alistair got involved with, I think he got friendly with Chester Kamen, who's, do you remember Nick Kamen, the Levi guy, the Levi advert guy? He takes his shirt off in the...
Yes.
Yeah, well, he's gone as well, right? He's not around anymore. He passed away. But Chester was his brother, and he played guitar with loads of people in England, session guitarist, and Alistair gradually got into the kind of modelling thing, and he knew a lot of the, like Yasmin Le Bon, I think, people like that. So he was still in the scene, but it was almost as if they'd said, there's no way this guy is going to play in this tin pot band that's not going to go anywhere. Get rid of him. We want to do something with him. As if he was picked. Maybe he was, I don't know.
It sounds like it's possible that it was that moment in time in which he was tapped to go move on and do something else. And so getting him out of the band was one of those ways of doing it without appearing to be too suspect.
Yeah.
Especially back in the day, people wouldn't, suspect it. But now looking back at it like you're doing in retrospect, you can start to maybe piece some of the puzzle together.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. And that's pretty close. I mean, I never sort of went out there or anything like that, but that's the close, because I lived in an apartment of a guy married into the family. Even the other guys from the band didn't do that because they didn't live in the flat with him. They lived on their own.
Right. Let me ask you, what's your opinion? We're talking about McCartney. What's your opinion on him being replaced? Is it something that you think happened or didn't happen?
Well, again, when you look at the evidence that's out there, it's like the thing about the Asher family, and the disappearing dad that they find in the basement, and all these and the difference in heights and things like that, and it all kind of makes sense. The like you said on your thing, the playing the guitar 1 minute, never looking at the neck, and then for the next years playing it constantly looking at the neck. I think that there's lots of people that have been replaced over the years. I think some of these pop stars today are not that person that started off. There's a lot of things that you can pick up on with body structure where you go, well, and I'm not talking about the things where they showed people's ears looking a bit rubbery and things like that. But, if they have the options to do these things and there is a let's just say even a financial gain to it, why would they not have backups? Everybody has backups for something. And if somebody starts getting out of hand and doesn't, it's like the whole Dave Chappelle thing, when Dave Chappelle reappeared and it kind of looks like Dave Chappelle and sounds like Dave Chappelle, but was that just done again as a little psyops or whatever? I don't know. But, the Beatles did all the symbolisms, that they've all done it and they're all doing it for a reason. And I think, like yourself, I mean, there was a thing some time ago, if I recall rightly, where Ringo came out and said, oh, yes, that's not the real bloke and so on. And people were like, yeah, Ringo's just getting old. He's getting senile. Well, what if he wasn't? What if he was genuinely told to tell people that or to keep the trail going? Because you mentioned about Elvis Costello's guy, didn't you?
Bruce Thomas, his bassist, yeah.
Yeah.
He just came out with a book and he talks about the replacement of Paul McCartney. I mean, it's, in my opinion, that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
And so I bought Bruce's book. I read it. Yeah, he talks about it and he puts forth all of the clues and talks about the things that you just talked about, the differences in stature, the difference in height, all of the clues. I mean, he did a nice job, in my view, of packaging all of the clues and things that people should look at. Now, he doesn't get into whether they wrote all their own music or not, but that's okay. I mean, it's one of those things when you step out and you talk about it and you're in the business, you could be blackballed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm afraid I'm one of these people that I'm not afraid of. I've always said this. I don't want to get eaten by a shark or tortured to death or anything like that. But I'm not afraid of these characters, And it says for evil to survive, it just takes good people to sit back and do nothing. And I'm not saying these people are evil, but there are some evil people in the business who will do anything to get what they want. And I don't mean necessarily the artists. A lot of these artists are trapped, and we could have been in the same situation. But, you know, it's like, you know, with the symbolism thing again, and the whole thing with the so-called secret societies, which of course aren't secret because everybody knows about them. But, you know, it's like a little while ago, they roll the band Europe out again, you know, for the old political big thing with the Final Countdown song, you know. So they rolled this band out after all these years, and what is their big logo? It's a pyramid with a man standing in the middle. Well, that's a bit odd. Why would you suddenly use that? And then you see Def Leppard, right? You know, they're still out there cranking it out, and their thing is the pyramid with the all-seeing eye in the middle. All of a sudden, they've always had a kind of shape like that. And then there's another guy I know called Doug Aldridge, was the guitarist of Whitesnake for a long time. Really nice bloke. He's in his 60s now. He's just had that tattooed on his arm here. Why? Why would you do that? They know what it means. And it's like, you know, from middle management up, they're all linked to various groups of people. I met Doug a couple of times at Frankfurt Music Fair. Really nice bloke, you know. Why would you do that? What? Because you just think at 64 years old it looks cool? No, it's because, you know, and we see people all the time now with Baphomets tattooed on them and all that kind of stuff, just walking around the streets. It all comes from somewhere. And if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. You know, I'm not here to judge anybody, but I see these things and observe these things, and they make me feel uncomfortable. And maybe I'll get a visit from the Men in Black later on. I don't know. But you know what I mean? But I'm not going to, like yourself, I'm not going to hide behind a name, or because then it doesn't look legitimate. It does, you know, and people could watch this and say, yeah, he's only saying that because he's one of them as well. You know, I could well be, but you'll be very hard pressed to find me doing anything odd. You know? Well,
people have said that about me. They'll say I'm a Freemason, which I'm not.
Yeah.
I work with Tom Harriet. I do not. I'm on Billy's payroll. I am not.
Yeah.
So people come up with all kinds of rationalizations so that they can continue to believe what they want to believe. That's really what it comes down to. So instead of listening and saying, well, maybe I should think more about what these guys are talking about or look into it, they just walk away and say, well, I'm not going to listen to them because of X, Y, and Z. So they'll actually just concoct reasons in their mind as to why they shouldn't listen to us.
Yeah. You know, Bill Burr, I used to like Bill Burr back in the day. And not so keen on him anymore. But he used to say, it's funny, he goes, you know, I'm doing a sketch and people are killing themselves laughing and everything like that. And then I sort of approach a different subject, and all of a sudden 3 people get out and walk out because they're disgusted because you're now stepping on their toes instead of accepting the whole experience. And what I would say about music especially, it's like the thing with actors, and everybody says it, actors play their best roles when they're not on the screen, right? When they're out in public, when they're doing their thing. But what I would say about music and that is enjoy music, you know, don't just switch it off. Enjoy it for what it is and how it makes you feel. If the songs are below the belt and you know that is, then no, you know, but it can put you off stuff. You know, we're not looking at the music, we're looking at what is behind it and why these people do certain things, right? So it's like when you've got people, and again, no disrespect to people, but it's like, you know, let's just say Johnny Depp, oh, we love you, and you ask them why. Why do you love Johnny? You don't know him, you haven't had coffee with him. He could be a really nasty piece of work for all you know. No, he's amazing. What, because you like Captain Jack? He's an actor. It's Captain Jack. He's not a real person. He's an actor. The same as all of them, you know. And I was in a film I have to tell you quickly my quick movie thing. I went back to the States because I had a house there that was being had some jobs doing on it and being sold, right? And I lived in the middle of nowhere in a little town called Golden, New Mexico. If you pull it up and have a look, you'll die when you see it. It's literally it's a ghost town. It's a ghost town, right? Anyway, I bought this little house there. But anyway, cut long story short, I went back and and my mate Steve, who ran a bagel shop, he said, here, they're doing a casting for a film, because they made a lot of films in New Mexico a few years back now. They made the Terminator there, and with Christian Bale, and Wild Hogs with John Travolta, which was the motorcycle thing, a bit like the Magnificent Seven, sort of comedy spoof. Made a load of films there. So he said, they're going to make a film here. We should go and audition for it. So I said, all right then. So we went down. He's a big tall bloke and I'm a little short bloke. And they picked us, right? Couldn't believe it. They picked us. So it was a film with Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones and Susan Sarandon, right? We were extras in this film. And we got there at 6 o'clock in the morning. And of all places, it was in a strip bar, right? In a lap dance bar, whatever you call it, you know. And we were there from 6 in the morning to 12 at night for Tommy Lee Jones to deliver one line. And the movie's called The Valley of Elah. It's a real depressing film. And some of the guys that I knew did sound and stuff like that. They were there doing sound in this club, and they got all the tracks out for the cameras on. And they made two versions of the film. One which was for TV, where the girls had to keep their tops on, and the other one where they could take them off, right? So they bring in the sort of understudy guy. He walks up to the bar. He says the line. They get all the cameras worked out. And I can't remember, but I think the producer was the guy who did the second James Bond with Daniel Craig. But he was a really nice bloke. He talked to everybody and so on. And then they bring Mr. Tommy Lee in. And it took all that time to do that one shoot for him to deliver one line, which was, "I'm looking for my son." That was it. Right? And that showed me that despite the fact that Tommy Lee's quite a character, everything that is put together that makes that film is in the post-production and in the editing. And that is what people buy into. They don't realise that there's this somewhat rather unhappy guy sitting in a trailer who's in a bad mood, because you could tell he was in a bad mood. And it's the same thing with all these people that like you said, you know, they idolise these people, and you know, the merchandise, everything that goes with it, then they don't even know them. It doesn't mean you shouldn't like what they do. You should enjoy what they do, you know, but to think that they're anything other than just people like us, say, doing a job, but they are in a different bracket, a much different bracket, you know.
Yeah, it's packaging. It's how they package it, and it's a presentation. They all this post-production stuff. Most people have no idea how it even applies to the music industry.
No.
None whatsoever.
We were saying, and you know about this, you know, there's a channel called Pegasus. It's an English guy, young English guy.
Yeah, Phil, Wings of Pegasus.
That's it. Yeah. Well, he did a breakdown on the Swift concert, and he also did a thing on the somewhat embarrassing Olympic opening ceremony here in France, which was full of it, wasn't it? I don't know if you saw that, but it was quite funny, very very tacky as well. But
I remember the Last Supper scene. I remember that, which was the cult of Pan.
That's right, and
cult of Dionysus.
Yeah, well, they did the Last Supper. They had the Pale Rider on the river. They had the head of Baal up on the stage. What was that doing there? And then they raised the flag upside down to show you that the whole thing's inverted, because, you know, with a big show, there's no way they're going to make a cock up like that by raising the flag upside down, right? And then, of course, they had a heavy metal band. There's blood everywhere and all this kind of stuff and so on. Of course, all the heavy metal fans were going mad. Oh, this is awesome. It's like they're miming. They're not even playing. It's playback, right? But yeah, so that guy Phil, he did a thing. He took the CD. I think it was the CD. He took the vocals off the CD, took the live concert, he took the vocals off of that, and he matched them, and they matched perfect. Because that person is not singing that stuff live. And people are horrified. That's ridiculous. It's like, well, no, the algorithm on the thing there that shows it, it's exactly the same. And then when they speak, the vocal sounds different. But they won't. And as we know, you cannot be jumping up and down and being picked up and spun around and everything like that, you know, without some kind of gurgling. And for an hour and a half, you'd be exhausted. And we've all known for years that people have been lip syncing, but these people will not have it that they pay 275 quid for a ticket to watch somebody mime to their own CD. And we know that's been going on for decades.
That happened to me going back about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. It was Foreigner doing their 40th anniversary tour. And in short order, once they got into the second song, I realized that the whole show was being mimed. The entire show. And it wasn't one original member. So I spent really good money to go see a tribute band. Yeah. That's really what it came down to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, when we played with Joe, we were a covers band, really. I mean, Joe was part of all that, but we were just his cover band musicians. But we had to learn all the songs, and we had to do it. You know, there's no way that we'd have got away with that. But again,
but at least you had Joe.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But he would, you know, I mean, he actually, I think, went half step down anyway, which made his voice sound a bit bigger, whereas these others don't want to do that. But the point of that is that people are still horrified when you say to them, they're not singing. Of course they're singing. No, they're not. They're not singing. That's miming, playback. You know, it's like I said, it's karaoke, but without. And they again, it's deception. It's all about deception, the world of deceit, you know. And if you can't do it, perhaps you should take a rest or go and do some vocal training or whatever and start again. And these are also younger people we're talking about as well. We're not just talking about the old guys that are struggling a bit. We're talking about somebody in their 30s that's singing to playback and then walking around like they literally are the greatest in the world, you know.
Yeah, people don't realize they're being sold a product.
Yeah.
It's a product. It's like a can of corn on the shelf in a supermarket. You're buying a product. And in order to sell that product, you've got to put the best presentation forward, put a nice label on it, an attractive label to catch people's attention.
Yeah, I think as well, if you remember when the big dancer craze came in, you know, you used to go and see bands. You didn't have all these guys and that all dancing around this. I think that was all brought in as a distraction as well, because that then made it, you know, it's like really every singer's got dancers on stage now because people want that show. But then that also detracts somewhat from the fact that person probably could get caught out by a lot of people, you know. But again, that's their choice, isn't it? That's what they decide to do. And, you know, changing the subject just a little bit and going back to all the symbolism and stuff. I was asked a little while ago, and we were talking about this when I was in Nashville. We weren't in Christian music or anything like that, but a lot of the people around us were. And somebody said to me, what do you think about these big Christian acts? You know, there's some that play stadiums. Well, now when you go and look at them, they're all flipping the symbology as well, right? And you're like, well, of course they are, because they've been got at as well. They're not going to let anyone with a free pass on this. So you've got bands like, I can't remember the name of the band now, Cutlass or one of these bands, playing these massive stadiums, and they're all flipping the same signs. They've all got their tongues sticking out and all. And it's like, that's not really what you guys are meant to be doing, is it? You know, have they been compromised as well to then help pass that kind of, again, that sort of, again, symbolism onto the audiences, and all the audiences are doing it as well?
Well, Taylor Swift is promoted as a Christian.
Yeah.
If you go to her Wikipedia page, it says that, you know, she's a Christian. And this is a tactic that they use where they want to pull in a segment of the population, and it's a process of conditioning and programming. So it happens all the time. You talk about these Christian bands. Now, some of them obviously, you know, are are legitimate and they stay honest and genuine to their message, but there are many others that do not.
No, and they're normally the ones you find playing in the big stadiums as well.
Right, exactly.
Because again, as you know, it costs a lot of money. That money has to come from somewhere. I mean, that when we were there, we went to a few shows where nobody got paid, and it was literally like the audience all put money out for that. Well, these people that pull up in 6 Arctic trucks, with 2 tour buses and everything, that has to be paid from somewhere. But again, I'd never seen any of it until 2020. I was just oblivious to it. I knew there was some dodgy things going on. And as I said to Chris and Dom, there was a few things we said, oh, that doesn't look good, does it? But once I started looking, and I could see it was just everywhere. And then that led me into, we started getting into the old world building stuff and all the things that have gone along. And basically, there's a good possibility that we've basically been lied to about everything, pretty much. Right along the board. My neighbour calls me, he said to me one day, he's a great guy, he's a musician as well, and he goes, conspiracy guy. And I said, no, what about calling us possibility guy? Is there a possibility that this is not on the level? And most times you find out, there's always a backstory, as you've said,
Yeah, I prefer conspiracy analyst.
Yeah, exactly. But I was telling him, I was talking to him about a certain subject that we won't get into here. But and he did the thing. He said, "Does it matter?" And I said, "It does, if it is coercing the minds of young children, especially because of course young kids now, 8, 9 years old, 10 years old, they go to these things and they see all this stuff." And of course, like we did, they mimic it. They want to wear the same clothes. Like I said, long hair, perm, up here like Paul Stanley. I thought that was cool. At the time,
I get that too, where people will say, well, why does it matter? And my response is, do you accept being lied to? And when you take it a step further, there's a reason why you're being lied to. They're not lying because they just want to lie. They're lying because they're being deceptive. So if you accept being lied to, if you accept being deceived, then I don't know what to tell you. Because most people wouldn't accept lies and deception close to home.
That's right, yeah.
So if your spouse was lying to you about an affair, and then you find out that she is having an affair, and she turns around and say, well, why does it matter? Well, I think it would matter to them.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I mean, so they can't look at it from a big picture perspective, and they don't take the next step, Garry, where they ask, why is there all of this lying? Why is there all of this symbolism? Why is all this stuff going on? They just kind of go along to get along.
Yeah, and if you as we said, the especially the music, you've got certain singers, and they're standing there with a group of ex-presidents all sat there, and you look at this person, you go, why are these guys, why they got this woman behind them, all smiling like this, and you're like, you're a pop singer. What are you? Because you're the perfect tool to push some of their agendas on certain people. And that's why you see the likes of Bono and that doing his thing and all these people. And then when you go and look into their backgrounds again, you find out that somewhere along the line, they're all connected. Not necessarily the drummer or the bass player or whatever, but, they must scratch their heads and go, what are you doing all this? Where's all this money gone? Why are you raising money for all this? But apparently you're also being investigated for fraud and things like that happen, and again, it keeps people distracted. And it also divides people. I mean, I got called a couple of things a few times. My best man at my wedding and was the first manager of my band was gay. I don't care what you do to your body. That's down to you, and you'll have to pay for it in the end. But don't lie to me about it and try and pretend you're somebody that you're not. In fact, it's actually against the law to do that. If you look in the old Law Society things, if you pertain to be somebody or something that you're not, to gain fame, fortune, money, whatever it is, as actually fraud, and you can go to jail for that. Well, of course, none of them are going to go to jail for that because they all work for that particular system. But I don't care what anybody does, as long as they're honest. I mean, we've all told little what we call porky pies, a big fish story now and again. But when it's blatant and it can affect people dramatically, then I think that's again where that line gets crossed, and you either say, well, yeah, all right, it doesn't matter, or you say, I don't want anything to do with that, I'm out, thank you very much, Yeah,
if you're inflicting intentional harm, if it's social engineering to push across an agenda which only benefits one party and not everybody, that's a big problem. That's a very, very big problem. And again, most people don't view it that way. Most people aren't even aware or awake to much of what we're talking about, what's really going on in the world. You would expect certain events that took place, like going back to C-19 in March of 2020, that people would have woke up to that. That was my wake-up call, Garry, because back then I thought that the awakening was far more advanced than it actually was. And so when that rolled out, I had to reset where I thought the world was at with waking up. I realized that, oh boy, we have a long, long way to go.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was, of course, that's how I found Mark. He did his classic in the car, white knuckled thing, and went bananas, And when I got his book, his third book, this guy that I was talking to, who was here, I told you about, who was talking about, not the Beatles. He started reading Mark's book, and he kept laughing. He's ex-school teacher, right? So I thought, well, there you go. What you going to do? So he started laughing, and I said, "What are you laughing at?" And he goes, "This is the stupidest stuff I've ever read." And I said, "Well, don't read it then." And he said, No, I'll have a look through. And he kept laughing. He read about 70 or 80 pages. He didn't read a lot, but you know what he said? He goes at the end. He goes, "Well, I don't agree with everything that I've read, but he does make some good points." And I went, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. That's all you need to make people perhaps think that, like George Carlin said, that the game is rigged, And one of the things that Mark said in that book was, with the nonsense, they were just waiting for the green light. And he says, "What's that supposed to mean?" And I said, "Well, they were waiting for the green light, the go light, mate. Let's go." That's what they, does that upset you or something? That's the truth. That's what they were waiting for. But what are the repercussions after that, And it's funny because I don't read, right? I haven't read anything I read a few bits and pieces, but I don't read books, right? And in 2019, I started reading this book, which is to do with a guy moving to France and opening a restaurant. I just started reading this book, and my mum couldn't believe it. She's like, "Well, you don't read?" And I was like, "Well, that's good, And then I started reading a couple of other bits and pieces, and then I got Mark's book, and I read it to my mum out loud every morning whilst we had coffee, which is almost impossible. I read the whole book over 2 weeks, cover to cover, and then I started getting some other books and so on. Then we got the Bible out, right? And I had to flick through that, and I was like, "Well, this makes sense. This makes sense." Like I said, I'm not religious. I don't go to church or anything like that, but I believe in a creator and I believe in God. And I started reading that, and when I spoke to Mark, Mr. E. Mark, he said that's because you were meant to start reading now, so that you could start to take all this in. And then out of the blue, my brother started doing the same thing. And that's because it's our time to understand these things. We were given that gift, that gift of sight, And it's not saying we're better than anybody else. It's just our time, and I've been reading ever since,
Well, that's a question that gets asked. My wife and I talk about this. My wife is completely awake as well. And she will say, "Well, how come some people wake up and others do not?" And I said, "I guess it's just a matter of timing. Some people will never wake up because that's not their lot in life, in this life.
No.
But for others, it is to wake up and to talk about it. My attitude is, if I could just touch one person here or there, that's 1 or 2 or 3 more people that are going to get really a lot smarter about how this world really works.
Yeah.
And, we're not going to be able to, in my opinion, some people will disagree with me, but the way I approach this is I'm not going to change this world to any great degree, but mostly what we're going to be able to do from an individual perspective to help ourselves and our family members and our inner circle of friends is to help them to avoid the traps as best as possible, because there are a lot of traps out there that they set that capture people. One of them is debt.
Yeah.
So many people, they get hooked, trapped into that debt machine, and that's that. I mean, the water level is up here, if not beyond the nostrils. And when that happens, you're no longer operating from a critical thinking perspective. Now it's survival.
Yeah, yeah.
People get stressed and anxious. Those are the types of things that I think that we have to, as humans, that we have to accomplish first. We have to get the basics understood and the decks cleared at that level. And then you can move on to the next level and the level after that in understanding what this control system's all about.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Well, I was talking to somebody, again, this friend, his wife, and I said to her, do you think when you die, that's it? It's all over, right? Are you one of those or what? And she goes, oh, yeah. I said, well, my question was always with that, it was how would you know until that happens? None of us will ever know. I said, but I think something else happens. And I'll find out when that's what I think. It's not because I'm trying to make myself feel good or save myself or anything like that. And my brother feels the same way. A couple of our friends feel the same way. And she said, no. She said, I'm not interested in any of that. And she's like 80. So she goes, I'm not interested in any of that. And I said, well, that's fair play. But I think, and I said, what I think here is this is a testing ground for you to learn. And as you learn, you make mistakes, you try and fix those mistakes. One of the things that I've learned is if I can help somebody, then it's not going to cost me anything to do it. You know, you do something because you can, not because you have to. And I feel that this whole realm here is about the journey, like you said. And then when it comes to the end of this time here, which it will for everybody, as we know, something will happen. And if you've learnt something along the way and you've done whatever and you've tried your best and you know, you have to make mistakes so you never learn, something else takes you to that next level. And I truly believe that, you know. To ask me that 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, I don't know, whatever, you know. But I think it came to that point where it was my time to learn, you know. And I'm not frightened of talking to people about it, you know. I was always the one that never said anything. Now I can't keep my mouth shut, you know. It's terrible.
Well, you and I are on the same page as far as what this is all about, and it's development for the soul. And you're right. I mean, we're not going to know if there's an afterlife or another turn of the crank with another incarnation until it happens.
That's right.
But in the meantime, we're here and we've got to live this life. And my view is to live this life as productively and as fulfilling as you can with as much happiness as you possibly can. But you also have a responsibility to understand lies and deception, because you're not going to live a fulfilling and happy life if you're going down their path of lies and deception, because that's not what they intend for you.
No.
So you have to be the captain of your ship.
Exactly.
And you can't have them driving your car. No.
It's funny, we've got me and my brother are going to do a chat about it. We haven't received it yet, but we were notified a few weeks ago now that we're going to get a doomsday book sent to us by the wonderful French government, right? And it's like, oh God, here we go again. Because, you know, we grew up in the 70s when they showed you those ridiculous films, those models getting blown over and all that kind of stuff, which is obviously, it looks like a Thunderbirds cartoon now. So we're going to get this thing sent to us. And it's basically what to do in an emergency, right? And because everybody knew that 2025 was going to be a bit skew-whiff anyway, because everybody had been talking about it, right? So we're going to get this booklet, and one of the parts of the booklet apparently talks about what happens if they drop a certain type of bomb on us, right? Which, of course, is... And it actually says, close windows and doors and try to form a bunker using mattresses and that. Well, we heard all that in the 70s, right? And there are people going, oh my God, oh my goodness, you know, it's like, This is just wash, rinse, repeat. It's wash, rinse, repeat. That is to keep people in fear again. And you'll never get to the end of this journey if you live in fear. And that's one of the biggest weapons that they've been able to use in small form and long form, is to keep people in fear. And of course, those people then never get to move forward, you know. But that was another interesting thing, that all of a sudden, out of the blue, we're going to get this thing, and it's probably going to have all those little clip art pictures in, you know, that used to use on on the old computers or something like that. It's going to be great, you know, very funny.
They just recycled the scripts. They do. And people ask, well, why do they do that? I said, because they work.
Yeah, exactly.
When they don't work anymore, then they'll write a different script. So as long as people continue to buy into the fear and to buy into the deception and the lies, then they're going to continue down that path. So
let me ask you just quickly, do you think, because we've talked about this, I don't use a smartphone, right? We've got one, but I don't need one. I don't look at one. You'll never see me at the table. You'll never see me doing any of this. My mum doesn't. My brother's got one because he's a member of this hiking group, but that's about it. What was it? And we know about the MK Ultra. We know about all these different things, the flicker rates and screens and everything. What was it that really changed people's perceptions in 2019, 2020? Because that's when it really went boom, wasn't it? You know, when you really saw people start to where you were scratching your heads going, really? You can't see what's going on? I'm convinced it was something to do with this, because everybody had their heads buried in their phones, so they were constantly being bombarded. Well, when we were kids, you got to see the 5 o'clock news before you got sent to bed, and that was it. So they were constantly being boom, 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 like that. And some other friends of ours that don't subscribe to the smartphone thing, they've said the same thing. They said, well, we don't think like that. We don't. Maybe it is something to do with that. I don't know. That's what I would use if I was them. I would use, and of course, the social media thing. I always said to everybody, social media is free for a reason. What do you think it's free for?
Right.
It's a conditioning tool, isn't it? And if all the old companies that we talk about with the 3 letters, you know, if they did that kind of thing on people back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, if they did, what do you think they're doing now? You know, I mean, if you were doing that, that's what you would be doing. You advance with it. Well, we can get people. It's like when you see these things, like, you know, like I said, you're doing something, or say you're using YouTube and you think of something, and then all of a sudden a video to do with an advert pops up in your thing, and you're like, hang on a minute, I don't want double glazing. Why have I got a thing on double? Oh, that's right, we're just going to have some new windows fitted or something like that, you know? Yeah,
well, the smartphones it's another tool that bombards people with information, and it's constant reinforcement of that information. And even when I go to the gym, I see people, they sit down on the machines and they'll exercise a little bit. And then, Garry, what they'll do is they'll start scrolling through their phone on the exercise machine.
Yeah.
In fact, I went to one guy one time. He was just sitting there. It was a machine that I wanted to use, and I'm sure other people. And I said to him, why don't you just go home and do that on your couch? Why are you here sitting there oblivious to everybody else that's here? It's inconsiderate, number one. That's the other thing. People are oblivious to other people, and there's just a lack of politeness, a lack of consideration toward other people. And that's something else that is just pervasive, at least here in the United States.
Oh, it's the same here. It's the same here. It took a little bit longer to kick in, but now it's, you know, it's everywhere, and it's not just kids either. It's adults as well. You know, restaurants, because of course, you know, France is very famous for especially lunch times, and it's I think again for the last 10, 15 years especially, but it's really amped up in the last 5 years, and we sort of laugh, you know, say, here they come, look, here they come. Yep, there they all are, and they sit there. Nobody talks to each other. You know, they just, you know, because the the old saying, you know, everyone's famous for 15 minutes. They just want that fame to keep going by, and all those things that they did like years ago, like the ice bucket challenge. You remember that, where people were tipping?
Yeah.
You know, that was all designed just to see if people would go and do something like that. And they go, well, they'll do that. They'll do anything. What else can we get them to do? I wonder what else we can get them to do. I know what we'll do. We'll get everybody to change their profile picture to a flag of a country they can't even pronounce. How about that? They went and did it, you know. It just boggles my mind. But as, you know, like you said with Chris and Dom and that, you know, we all sort of feel the same way. And it's not mocking other people. We find it funny. Maybe it's meant to be like that. Maybe that's what the challenge, the test is. It, you know, I don't think anybody should be divided. I think it's ridiculous. And that's what they like to do. But maybe it's meant to be like this. This is that final test. I don't know. But it certainly feels like it when you see some of these things, you know. Yeah, it's sad. But it's also, again, everybody says it. It's like, the greatest time to be alive. I was getting a bit bored, you know what I mean? I was like, yeah, God, got to do the same thing again. And all this stuff started to happen. And the energy that I don't find anything depressing about it. I mean, it's very sad that there are people that aren't here anymore. We've had a few things happen here, thanks to the possibility of certain things. But my mum will tell you, 89, she's 89 on Wednesday. And she said, I've learnt more in the last 5 years than in my entire life, you know, and it's true, you know, and it's almost like it was given to us as a gift.
Good for your mom. My mom is going to be 90 in July. It's the same thing. She's far more awake at her age than most people that I talk to in the streets. You can't say it's an age thing. It's what you were saying before, Garry. It's either your time to wake up or it's not, you know. And so you could be 15 years old. In fact, I did an interview with a young lady who was 13 years old, and she did a whole bunch of research on the Beatles. She was one sharp cookie. She's very bright. Most 13-year-olds are not doing anything remotely like that or any research, you know. So then you have like your mom and my mom and then everybody in between. So I don't know.
See, I'm a big fan of music from the 30s. We've got all the old, you know, all the fall songs and all this kind of stuff, you know. I can't listen to heavy rock and heavy metal anymore, you know, because now I'm sort of you know, yeah. But anyway, we listen to all this old background music. We love all this stuff. And it's almost as if we, in fact, came from a different era and we kind of knew that there were these things and we were given another chance type of thing, if that makes sense, you know. And maybe a young girl like that or a young boy like that has this knowledge from a different era that's been passed on, you know, because you hear a lot of things about that. And again, that opens your eyes up to things where you think, well, why is it that we're given this chance? We're given this chance to see. They say the internet, of course, you know, you got the www in Hebrew, you know, all about that stuff. It's a net and it captures people. That's why it's called a net and the web. But we also had it to be able to use it to our advantage as a tool. And it's been brilliant with the music, of course, because we can send music all over the world with other artists and stuff. But the thing that was designed to basically take us all out and imprison us more, we've actually used it as a little tool to do the opposite. And they know that. They know that. And they know that what is going to happen in the end. They all know what's going to happen in the end. And I don't think they're going to be too pleased with the results in the end. But there you go. You know, that's the only way you can put it, you know.
I agree. I hold out hope. I really do. And it may not be in my lifetime, but in future generations, they'll be able to break the code
but
and break through this matrix.
You've sowed a seed, and that will never die. That will always be around. That energy will always. I'm a true believer in good energy, and that's why I've said with our music, I said we only do stuff with good energy. Doesn't mean it can't be hard and powerful and have a strong message, but you know what I would say to people that watch these kind of videos, and there's lots of people there, it's very easy to press the save button. that goes directly to your channel. It doesn't mean that you're opening yourself up to stuff, but if there's something that really, you know, sings to you, the message in there, just press the save button, and then people will see, wow, you research this, you know, because that's what it is. And there's so many people don't want to do that. I mean, we actually made a little time capsule where we've put on SD drives and stuff like that, and loads and loads of stuff that we're gonna bury somewhere, and then hopefully in years to come, like in the Planet of the Apes movie, you know, in the library, they'll find this and go, what on earth is this? And that's why we've done it with paper as well, because they might not be able to read an SD chip back then or later on, you know what I mean? But that's part of it, and you feel like you're in this. It is an adventure, you know. It's a big adventure, and it's I mean, the girl Gina, the Darkyra girl, I explained a few things to her, and to do with other subjects. And I said, just go and I set her out some little things to do. And she came back to me. She goes, you know what? I think you're right about that. And I said, well, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? There were other little subjects, but she goes, now you mention it. Yeah, there is something a bit odd there, isn't there? And I was like, there you go. Now she's got a only slightly autistic son who plays guitar, Vinny. He's a great guy. And I said, he's 16. That's your future. You either let him get dragged down this hole, or you help enlighten him to the world that we live in, and we've lived in for generations. You know, this is nothing new. This has been going on forever, you know. But it gives you that energy, you know, and that's what it's about, energy, not depression or like, no, it's not fair. It's like, yeah, come on, this is, you know, we can do anything that we want to do if we decide to do it.
Exactly. Exactly. I have 2 grandchildren, and I look at it's my responsibility, along with my daughter and her husband, who are awake as well, to teach your children well, and, you know, bring them into the world with a level of awareness that it gives them the tools and the ability to break through the indoctrination and the programming that they're going to be inundated with, really from the day that they're born. So your point with your friend's son, that's it. I mean, you have to invest in making sure that they have a pretty good understanding of what path they really should be on. And as I mentioned before, don't let somebody else drive your car. No.
It's all individual choice. It's all about choices, individual choice. And you know, if things go well for you, so be it. If they don't, I've always said, I've made so many cock-ups, Mike, you know, all kinds of things. I have never, ever blamed anybody else, ever, for anything that went wrong, because everything that went wrong was my choice. I chose to do that. I chose that person. But I think because I think like that, a really big plus always came from that. And then this happened, and then I'm like, oh no, not again. So now I've got to change this and that. And if the negative things that happened to me, and there were a few, nothing really bad, but there were a few, if none of them things had happened, we wouldn't be living here. My brother wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be doing the great things we're doing now. So, you know, again, the blame game is a really bad place to be. And, you know, especially when you get older, it's like, you know, grow up. Common sense, gut instinct has to play a major role in this journey. Does this look right to you? Not really. Well, don't do it then, you know. Intelligence is a different thing, you know. I used to do these things with a girl called Sarah, the 2020 things. I'll just tell you really quick, because I'm sure you probably got to get going. But in 2019, I decided I really needed to get my finger out and push the studio thing, right? Because there were a few things coming in out. I said, right, I was going to call it 2020 vision, right? Thinking clearly. That's what it was about. Thinking clearly, acting, getting things out there, you know, and so on. And then boom, the 2020 thing happened. And it was all of a sudden that 2020 vision thing took a whole new meaning, you know? And it was like, hang on a second, why did I even think that up? And why does this now, relate to exactly the things that are kind of going on. And then I made that decision to start to sort of, like I say, investigate and challenge what was going on, scratch my head and think, well, that doesn't make sense. So I met this girl called Sarah. She's a northerner from England. She's really cute. She's got a great voice. And she was like my little sidekick, and we looked at all kinds of things. A lot of it now is a bit old, and we've now found out that they made that up or whatever. But we got talking about all these things that were going on, and she said to me, she said, Garry, she said, there's a difference between intelligent people and people with common sense and gut instincts. And that doesn't mean intelligent people haven't got that, but if their lives of everything they've done has come out of a book that somebody else wrote, and they've been pushed in a various direction, there's a lot of difference, say, between that and somebody that automatically thinks that doesn't look good. What is this? That doesn't add up. Can't you see that? And it's like, well, no, they're telling us that. It goes, that doesn't add up. It could be any subject. And I think that's another thing that we've perhaps been given a little bit of a gift of. And I'm not saying to anybody that again, like I said, we're better than anybody. We're not. Of course we're not. We're the same. But we do see things slightly differently. And like you said, hopefully we can get that little bell ringing on just the odd person who then is brave enough to say something to somebody else and not fear anything,
Don't be fearful. Say what you've got to say. Do it in a way do it in an intelligent way. In other words, don't be ridiculing people, just going off on diatribes or whatever. And don't do that, because nobody's going to listen to you.
No.
If you take that approach, nobody's going to give you the time of day. So it's very important to do it in a very even-keeled way. And even when you do it that way, you're still going to get people that are going to recoil and say, oh, no, that's ridiculous. You're a conspiracy person or whatever. But it's okay. Like you said, with your friend who started reading Mark's book, he got through 80 pages. Even though he was laughing through it, there were obviously passages in the book where he said, oh, okay, hold on a second. I'm not going to laugh at that part because that kind of makes a little bit of sense to me.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's how it works. It's not like you're going to hit people over the head with a hammer and wake them up. It just doesn't work that way. But Garry, this has been just a fabulous discussion.
Awesome.
You
thanks.
Seriously, man, you need to come back again. We could talk. I could talk forever.
Anytime. It's a pleasure.
So for people to catch up with you, what's the best website for them to take a look at your work?
Yeah, I'm just actually changing the main sites that we've had because I'm not doing the hosted thing now. I'm actually just doing a thing through Wix. So what I'll do is I'll send you the link, the new link, because it's just gone up, and it's just an information site about what we do here, really. I don't use any social media or anything like that. But you've got my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel.
I'll put that up. Yep.
Yeah, and you can put it. And and like I said, we're not trying to be. None of us are trying to be nasty or point fingers or anything like that. But it's now so obvious that going right the way back to when my mum was a child, that there is something that's been kept undercover and it's gradually coming to light, and I think the energy of people is drawing that out, and I think that's a powerful thing,